Okay, so we're now going to move on to animating the shape. So if I just scrub through here, this is what we're going to end up with. So we're animating different properties for each shape. Okay, so we have our objects we created earlier. We're going to start with this square layer. So we'll just expand that. When you initially expand it, you'll see that there are the sub-properties here. So if we just have a look inside contents here, so the contents of the square layer are the shape that we've created here. Okay, and then we have the properties for that particular shape and the transform properties for the shape here. Okay, and it's important to distinguish between that and the properties here. Now these are the transform properties for the layer as a whole. So if we had multiple shapes inside this layer and we applied these transform properties, it would apply them to all the shapes within that shape layer. Okay, now we only have one shape in the layer at the moment, but we just want to apply the transformations and animate the shape itself and not the layer. Okay, so it's just important to distinguish between those two. If we look inside these sub-properties here, so we have the properties for the shape itself, we have the properties for the stroke and the properties for the fill, and we can animate all of these separately if we wish. If we go inside the properties for the shape here, okay, we've got size. So if we adjust the size here, we can adjust the size of just the shape up and down. To distinguish and determine whether you've selected the layer or the shape, if I just click on the shape here, okay, you'll see that we've got a white bounding box here. If I click on the layer, you see you've got the blue bounding box. If I'm to change the position of the shape here, so if I just adjust the position of the shape, you'll see that the anchor point stays central because that's the anchor point for the layer itself. So the shape is being moved within the layer. If I wanted to move the position of the layer, so if we go into the transform, so these transform properties here are for the layer and not for the shape. So if we go into here and shift position, you'll see that the anchor point then moves with the shape because we're moving the layer and not the shape. Okay, so we're going to have a go at animating the shape properties here. So if we go back inside the shape properties, move the playhead to 12 frames. We're going to animate all three. So if we click on size, position and roundness to put in the keyframes, move back to 0. Okay, and then if we alter the size, so we're going to take the size down to 0. We can change the roundness, so if we put that up to a high value, about 300, so it starts off round. Actually, we won't animate the position at the moment. So if I scrub the needle there, you can see that the shape is scaling up and going from round to its original shape. Okay, and then if we compress the square layer, move on to the circle layer. Again, we're just animating the shape and not the layer. So these are the shape properties here. If we open up the actual shape, individual shape properties here, size and position, we're going to animate the shape again, just a simple one on this one. So if we click to put in a keyframe for size, and then if we change size to 0 on the first keyframe at 0, and then we've got just a simple scale up. The same effect as scaling, basically changing the size. Okay, and then compress again. So really practice again at working with multiple layers, and particularly all these sub properties that we can play with. So again, move the playhead to 12. Inside the triangle layer here, expanding it. If we go into the original shape was called Polystar 1, so if we go into there, okay, and then if we expand the Polystar Path 1, which is the shape properties again, you see we've got some additional properties here that we can play with and experiment with and animate. Okay, so the additional things we've got here, are the points. So we can increase the number of points, go through a various sided polygon shape, multiple sides, or down to a straightforward triangle. A position and rotation we know about. Outer radius. Okay, if we increase that, so we're increasing the size of the shape. Okay, around this central anchor point. Outer roundness is quite an interesting one, so again that just smooths off the corners. or if we go into the negative number, you get these kind of interesting kind of overlapping shapes. Okay, we'll just set, if you play with the settings and you find you want to go back to the original settings, if you just right click on any value and select reset, that'll take it back to the original value. Okay, again, just to illustrate the difference between the shape layer and the layer for the shape itself and the overall shape layer. If we adjust the rotation here, so this is inside the shape layer, you'll see it rotates around the central anchor point. But if we go to, so I'll just reset that, if we select the properties for the layer itself, so the layer rather than the shape, and rotate, you'll see that it's the anchor point's slightly off center here, okay, because that's the anchor point for the layer overall. And again, we can just reset that. Okay, so again, this is really an opportunity to experiment. We'll go to 12 frames. We're going to animate some of these newer properties, so points, outer radius, outer roundness, and we'll go for a rotation as well. So inserting keyframes there. Okay, playhead back to 0, and again we can change these values. We change the rotation to about 90. We can increase the number of points. We can change the outer radius to 0, and then we can increase the outer roundness up, and then we can scrub the needle to see how that works out. Actually, I'm going to decrease the outer roundness, sorry, rather than increase, and then we get that kind of unusual shape at the beginning. There we go. And again, you know, it's a question, sorry, I don't want to insert a new keyframe though, so I need to go back to 0. Just modify that further and then scrub the needle, so that's okay. Got something kind of interesting going on there. So really an opportunity to experiment. Okay, so we'll move on to the star layer, and again, if we expand the shape here inside the actual shape sublayer here, and again we have a series of properties we can experiment with, a few new ones. So particularly inner radius and outer radius here. If we adjust the inner radius, you'll see that the points here of the shape move outward. So the points where two edges meet move outwards. Some kind of times referred to as vertices. Or if we adjust the outer radius, you'll see the points, the outer points where the vertices meet, move outwards. Okay, so we'll select some properties to animate here again. So playhead at 12 frames. We'll go for points, inner radius, outer radius, and outer roundness. To insert keyframes, back to 0, and then. Okay, so again with the playhead back at 0, we can experiment with these settings here. So we'll increase the number of points. So again, I mean you can experiment yourselves with this. We'll put inner radius and outer radius down to 0, which effectively scales it down, and then we can increase maybe outer roundness, and then we can scrub the needle to see what effect that has. So quite an interesting animation produced there. But obviously before you create the animation, experimenting with these values before you've created a keyframe can be useful, and then you get a sense of what kind of effects you can create. Okay, and then we can move on to the rounded rectangle layer. Again, looking at the properties for the shape itself here, the shape itself rather than the layer, so just sort of reiterating that. So here we can, again to 12 frames, we can select the properties we want to animate. We'll just keep it simple again with this one, size and roundness. Move back to 0, size to 0, and then maybe increase the roundness a bit, scrub the needle, see if we're happy with that. Okay, so that is fine. So there we go. So if we play that through, we've animated all 5 shapes in slightly different ways by manipulating different properties. Okay.